Good morning everyone, hope you're all okay. I'm going to do a talk today on the poetry of the spirit. And poetry at one time was very important, and I think it still is. In the East, there's actually the way of poetry in Japan, which can lead you towards enlightenment. And we need beautiful things in these times, beautiful things to inspire us and uplift us. And poetry is one of them. So first I'm going to light the candle of harmony. I've got a nice scent thing here with a peppermint scent. So just keep this, just get it right. Just imagine that this light is the light of divinity within each one of us, in the heart of each one of us. Again, that's so desperately needed in modern society when everything's so materialistic and people are unaware of our potentiality, our spiritual potentiality. So let's just relax for a moment, breathe out any tension, be relaxed. Remember what I've said before about tuning the breath and the mind. Breathe out, just relax, be at peace for a few moments. Okay, so most of the world's great scriptures are conveyed to us through the medium of poetry. In fact, one of the Theosophical masters known to us as KH states that the true seer is always a poet. Liu Ji, who lived between 261 and 303 CE or AD, he composed a work called The Art of Writing, and he says in that the function of literature is to express the nature of nature. It can't be barred as it travels space and bolts across 1,000,000 years. Gazing to the fore, it forms models for people to come, and looking aft, meditates on symbols of the ancients. It can save teetering governments and weak armies. It gives voice to the dying wind of human virtue. No matter how far, this road will take you there. It will express the subtlest point. It waters the heart like clouds and rain, and shifts form like a changeable spirit. Inscribed on metal and stone, it spreads virtue, flowing with pipes and strings. Each day, the world is new. Each day, the world is new. Nowadays, poetry is regarded as being rather useless and purposeless, just pretty words on paper. But in the old days, poetry and art of all kinds, painting, music, etc., were regarded in the same way as in the above quotation, as more emphasis was given to their beneficial effect on the mind than on the welfare of the transient personality. Many of the old poets in the East and in Greece, Egypt, etc., were initiated into the mystery schools and were very highly regarded in society. Same in the West with the Druids, etc. Poetry and music in many cultures were not just arts, but a science in which the combination of sounds and words had a definite effect on the consciousness of the listener or performer in much the same way as mantras do. Paintings and drama were similarly created to have a beneficial result, or in some cases a negative one, if the person be a sorcerer or a black magician. The arts were not regarded just as entertaining, but had a definite purpose. Now, many of the poets, both Eastern and Western, had an intuitive understanding of spirituality and expressed it in their works. Shelley, Wordsworth, Tennyson, Byron, Yeats, etc. amongst others, produced some spiritually uplifting works in the West, and Rumi, Kabir, Tagore, Gibran, Ryokan and many others in the East. My personal leaning has always been more towards the East in poetry and philosophy, with an emphasis on Japanese and Chinese Buddhist poets, such as Ryokan, Laipo, Tufu, Ikkyu, Basho, etc., Rengetsu. The reason that most works are produced in poetic form is because poetry is akin to music in that it reaches parts that ordinary prose writing cannot reach, and is aimed more at the heart than the head. Esoteric teaching tells us that the heart is the centre of the spiritual part of us, and The Voice of the Silence, a poetic work translated by H.P. Blavatsky, tells us that there are two kinds of learning, the head and the heart, the head being intellectual and the heart the more spiritual. So true poetry is aimed at the heart. The big difference between the poems of East and West is that poems from the Orient tend to say a lot in a few words, whereas in the West the emphasis, particularly in Victorian poetry, is on luxuriance of imagery and language. The Zen teachers use the poem often as a vehicle for teaching, as in this poem by the Zen master Bankei. Unborn and imperishable is the original mind, earth, water, fire and wind, a temporary lodging for the night. Attached to this ephemeral burning house, you yourselves light the fire, kindle the flames in which you are consumed. So in those few words are the fundamental teachings of the spiritual path. In fact, you could use just that poem as a guide for living, if only we applied our intuition to it. Even more concise are the Zen Haiku, traditionally 3 lines of 5, 7, 5 syllables, a total of 17, developed from the Japanese waka, which consisted of 5 lines and 31 syllables, 5, 7, 5, 7, 7. The haiku should contain at least some reference to the season it is written about, traditionally. Poets in old Japan would get together and write linked verse. That is, one poet would write a haiku and then pass it on to the next, who would write his haiku, which should have some reference to the preceding one, and so on, from poet to poet. Haiku, though very short, have great meaning and spiritual significance, if read intuitively again. One of the most famous is by the haiku poet Matsuo Basho, written in 1686, and it goes, "An ancient pond, a frog jumps in, the splash of water." An ancient pond, a frog jumps in, the splash of water. To me, the pond might symbolise the calm mind, the original ancient mind, and the frog a thought from the lower mind, which creates a disturbance. But then again, I may be completely wrong, and I'm sure there are people here who might find their own interpretations. But really, we shouldn't be seeking for material interpretations. Although haiku may seem rather empty to the lower intellectual mind, to the intuition they contain a wealth of meaning. In the West, we are used to long drawn-out descriptions and having our intellects filled with other people's ideas. In the East, more emphasis was put on developing the intuition, as in the Zen koan, which was a short statement or saying that had no apparent sense, but was meant to drive us into the depths of our consciousness to find our true nature. One of the most famous is, "Has a dog got the Buddha nature?" And the answer is mu, which means no in Japanese, but actually may not mean no in a negative sense, but refers to nothingness, which is the void, which is the fullness and emptiness at the same time. Empty to the conditioned intellect, but full to the spiritual sense. As it says in The Voice of the Silence again, we have to study the fullness of the seeming void and the voidness of the seeming full. Now, Bankei again, the Zen master I mentioned from the 17th century, was rather critical of koans, saying that they were designed by certain Zen masters personally for specific students, and therefore to use them is in a way imitation and not spontaneous, as Zen and indeed all spiritual practices should be. But of course they may have some value. So there are some great poets in the Zen and Taoist tradition, Lai Po, Tufu, Ryokan, Wenxiang, and many poets known as the mountain poets, who lived in the mountains in China and produced some very beautiful poetry, merging spirituality with nature, as many poets from both East and West have done throughout the ages. As an example is the poem from the 8th century AD poet Tufu, titled Morning Rain. And he says, "A slight rain comes, bathed in dawn light. I hear it among treetop leaves before mist arrives. Soon it sprinkles the soil, and wind-blown follows clouds away. Deepened colours grace thatched homes for a moment. Flocks and herds of things wild glisten faintly. Then the scent of musk opens across half a mountain and lingers on past noon." So to me that is an incredibly deep and beautiful poem. You know, it paints a picture very, very clearly, and not using that many words. So most of these poets wrote of the transitory nature of life, but not in a mournful way, because they also pointed to the beauty of the eternal. The Zen poet Ryokan from Japan says, "My life may appear melancholy, but travelling through this world, I have entrusted myself to heaven. In my sack, 3 show of rice. By the hearth, a bundle of firewood. If someone asks, what is the mark of enlightenment or illusion, I cannot say. Wealth and honour are nothing but dust. As the evening rain falls, I sit in my hermitage and stretch out both feet in answer." Simple as that. And Wang Wei, a Chinese poet from the 8th century, writes, "In middle life, I became immersed in the philosophy of Tao. Later, I went to live at the foot of South Mountain. When I am happy, I walk alone in the hills. I know within my heart what is good and what is beautiful. When I arrive at the source of the stream, I sit down to rest and watch the mists rising. Sometimes I need a time-worn woodcutter, talking and laughing together. We forget it is time to go home." So the feel of this kind of poetry is tranquil and calming. It is representative of a meditative state of mind at peace with the world, and an acceptance of the process of aging and death as being part of nature's process, and not final at all, as everything is cyclic, as theosophical teaching tells us. The voice of the silence expresses this state of mind in the following verses. "Both action and inaction may find room in thee, thy body agitated, thy mind tranquil, thy soul as limpid as a mountain lake. Have patience, candidate, as one who fears no failure, courts no success. Fix thy soul's gaze upon the star whose ray thou art, the flaming star that shines within the lightless depths of ever-being, the boundless fields of the unknown. Have perseverance, as one who doth forevermore endure. Thy shadows live and vanish. That which in thee shall live forever, that which in thee knows, for it is knowledge, is not a fleeting life. 'Tis the man that was, that is, and will be, for whom the hour shall never strike. So to me, I find those very beautiful, inspiring words. In fact, I repeat them again, so both action and inaction may find room in thee. Thy body agitated, thy mind tranquil, thy soul as limpid as a mountain lake. Have patience, candidate, as one who fears no failure, courts no success. Fix thy soul's gaze upon the star whose ray thou art, the flaming star that shines within the lightless depths of ever-being, the boundless fields of the unknown. Have perseverance, as one who doth for evermore endure. Thy shadows, personal selves, live and vanish. That which in thee shall live forever, that which in thee knows, for it is knowledge, is not a fleeting life. 'Tis the man that was, that is, and will be, for whom the hour will never strike. The hour will never strike. So in India and the Middle East, a different kind of poetry emerged, which was more passionate and devotional. Poets like Rumi, Kabir, Lala, and more recently Tagore and Gibran produced works that were more ecstatic in nature, expressing love for the divine or God, but a much wider view of God than that of Orthodox Christianity or the Muslims or Hindu. Of course, there were many poets, even in the Christian tradition, who transcended the limitations of their religion to soar in the realms of spirit, like St. John of the Cross, Hildegard of Bingen, St. Therese of Lisieux, and others. William Shakespeare also had a great insight into human nature and the spirit. He writes in this sonnet, "Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. Oh no, it is never fixed mark, that looks on tempests and is never shaken. It is the star to every wandering bark, whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. Love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come. Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out, even to the edge of doom. If this be error, and upon me proved, I never writ, nor no man ever loved." Another poet whose works I admire is Rumi, who was active in Afghanistan in the 13th century. He wrote some very beautiful love poetry, understandable on various levels, such as this one. A moment of happiness, you and I, sitting on the veranda. Apparently two, but one in soul, you and I. We feel the flowing water of life here, you and I, with the garden's beauty and the birds singing. The stars will be watching us, and we will show them what it is to be a thin crescent moon. You and I, unselfed, will be together, indifferent to idle speculation, you and I. The parrot of heaven will be cracking sugar as we laugh together, you and I. In one form upon this earth, and in another form in a timeless, sweet land. So Rumi belonged to the Sufi tradition, which is the esoteric or mystical side of Islam. Their poetry was rich in symbology and sometimes thought to be somewhat sensual, as many of the poems refer to the relationship between lover and beloved in a seemingly earthly way. But as said, this is symbolic, and images like this may have been used to conceal teachings from the more orthodox Muslims who disapproved of the Sufis' mystical approach. In a talk I gave on Sufism, I mentioned Florence Lederer, who translated the Sufi mystical work The Secret Rose Garden by another Sufi writer, and she explains this symbology in her introduction. And again I went into this, but I'll go into it again because it's very appropriate for this talk. She says, in reading the enraptured poetry of the Sufis, it should be borne in mind that though the symbols of earthly love and beauty are freely used, yet the real meaning is concealed. No doubt this was originally done to keep secret their mystic lore, lest the profane should scoff. But as time went on, certain words began to have a recognised meaning amongst themselves. For instance, embraces and kisses are raptures of love. Sleep is contemplation. Perfume, the wish for divine favour. Idolaters mean men of the pure faith, not infidels. Wine, which was forbidden by Muhammad to his followers, was used as a word symbol by the Sufis to denote spiritual knowledge, and the wine cellar means the spiritual guide. A tavern is a place where the wine of divine love inebriates the pilgrim. Intoxication means religious ecstasy. Mirth, the joy in the love of deity. Beauty means the glory of the beloved. Curls and tresses mean plurality, veiling the face of unity from its lovers. The cheek means divine essence of names and qualities. The down is the world of pure spirits, which is nearest to divinity. The mole on the cheek is the point of indivisible unity. The torch is the light kindled in the heart of the beloved. So Florence Lederer goes on to say, we thus see that to the Sufi, the love between man and woman is a shadowed picture of the love between the soul and God, or the divine. And just as a lover will dream of his beloved, singing her praises and thirsting for a sight of her face, so do the Sufis eternally dream of their God, ever contemplating his attributes and consumed with a burning desire for his presence. The history of mysticism contains many impassioned love songs to the Absolute, but in Sufi poetry there's a peculiar richness, a depth, a colour, which fascinates and charms so many of us. Sufi poetry abounds in allegories and love romances, the stories of Layla and Majnun, Yusuf and Zuleika, Salaman and Absal, in which it is easy to read the hidden meaning of passion for the Absolute. Various are the love themes of the Sufis. We hear songs of the nightingale in love with the rose, the moth fluttering round the light of the candle, the mourning dove who has lost her mate, the snow melting in the desert and mounting as vapour to the sky, of a dark night in the desert, through which a frenzied camel madly plunges, of a reed torn from its bed and made into a flute, whose plaintive music fills the eyes with tears. That's the end of the quote. So spiritual art certainly gives the mind room to soar, as the above definitions and examples prove. Someone who is intuitively or mystically minded will find a limitation in mere prose and will wish to try to share their experience with others in the most effective way possible. Poetry and music being the two most efficacious means or methods in this world of relative truths. Also painting may give us deep insights, and prose, if poetically written. I think someone said, be a poet even when writing prose. Can't remember who said it. But of course, poetry is not just in the written word, it is also in the heart of the aspirant. Someone can be a great poet without ever committing anything to writing or canvas, or without writing a note of music. It is in a person's bearing, the way they talk and act and relate to others. This is because we have to look deeply into what makes a person a poet. This is because, to me, it is because they have some degree of communication with their inner or higher self. Of course, I'm here discussing poets such as the examples given in this talk up to now. There are also those poets who write from an attachment to the lower thoughts and feelings, and whose motives may be suspect or material in some way, like fame or fortune, or to promote some materialistically political idea. But these are not who we are discussing in this talk, as this is not the poetry of the spirit, but of the personal self or the intellect. But many of those kind of poems may have their place, to get across certain points. Across, it doesn't always have to be spiritual. So the written poem is just the way the person expresses how they feel, if they have the education to be able to do it. Otherwise they may remain mute shellies or express their feelings in the way they live in the world. Because of course poetry is just the outer expression of an inner feeling or experience, a way to use words to try and draw the mind to a higher level. And many writers use words in this way, as the German philosopher Novalis, or George Philipp Friedrich Freiherr von Hardenberg, no wonder he called himself Novalis, did in his works like Hymns to the Night and the Novices of Sais. He died very young, I think he was only 29 or 30 when he died. Here are a few words from his Hymns to the Night to give an example of such writing. He says, before all the wondrous shows of the widespread space around him, what living sentient thing loves not the all-joyous light, with its colours, its rays and undulations, its gentle omnipresence in the form of the wakening day. The giant world of the unresting constellations inhales it as the innermost soul of life and floats dancing in its blue flood. The sparkling ever-tranquil stone, the thoughtful imbibing plant, and the wild burning multiform beast inhales it. But more than all, the lordly stranger with the sense-filled eyes, the swaying walk, and the sweetly closed, melodious lips. Like a king of earthly nature, it rouses every force to countless transformations, binds and unbinds, innumerable alliances, hangs its heavenly form around every earthly substance. Its presence alone reveals the marvellous splendour of the kingdoms of the world. Beautiful words. So we can see in this world the straining to reach out and understand something beyond words, and to share it with others in a way that inspires and uplifts. Not as in modern literature to titillate or to shock or to appeal to the lower emotions, but to light the flame of beauty in the heart of the reader, and to share something wonderful and which will remain secret to those not sensitive enough to imbibe the wonder of the words. But as in the Zen and Taoist writings, words should lead the mind beyond words, beyond mind even, to a formless realm. H.P. Blavatsky describes the process in notes taken down reputedly by one of her pupils, Robert Bowen. This mode of thinking, she says, is what the Indians call Jnana Yoga. As one progresses in Jnana Yoga, one finds its conceptions arising, that one is conscious of them, one cannot express nor yet formulate into any sort of mental picture. As time goes on, these conceptions will form into mental pictures. This is a time to be on guard and refuse to be deluded with the idea that the newfound and wonderful picture must represent reality. It does not. As one works on, one finds the once admired picture growing dull and unsatisfying, and finally fading out or being thrown away. This is another danger point, because for the moment one is left in a void, without any conception to support one. And one may be tempted to revive the cast-off picture, for want of a better one to cling to. The true student, however, will work on unconcerned, and presently further formless gleams come, which again in time give rise to a larger and more beautiful picture than the last. But the learner will now know that no picture will ever represent the truth. This last splendid picture will grow dull and fade like the others, and so the process goes on, until at last the mind and its pictures are transcended, and the learner enters and dwells in a world of no form, but of which all forms are narrowed reflections. The genius of the poet is in just how far he can lead us on this path, how far he can help us to bring about the mind's illumination by the spiritual part of us. Indeed, to what degree he can touch the heart with something beyond human emotion, which is unstable to say the least, and to become rooted in the eternal, which is the only true source of what we may call peace. What we call love, in the experience of the mystics, is not the pale reflection that we experience on earth between ourselves and others, and which is often distorted by emotionalism and selfishness, sensuality, but the seed in our hearts of the harmony that is the first manifestation of the universe of light. So there is a description, which I also have mentioned in the talks, of Karma Deva in the Theosophical Glossary. And it says in lovely words, shows how the limited mind degrades certain words and ideas. For example, this word karma, not karma, K-A-R-M-A, but kama, K-A-M-A. And this is usually connected with desire and sexuality, as in the Kama Sutra. But listen to this interpretation. Kama is the first conscious, all-embracing desire for universal good, love, and for all that lives and feels, needs help and kindness. The first feeling of infinite tender compassion and mercy that arose in the consciousness of the creative one force as soon as it came into life and being as a ray from the Absolute. Says the Rig Veda, desire first arose in it, which was the primal germ of mind, and which sages, searching with their intellect, have discovered in their heart to be the bond which connects entity with non-entity, or manas with pure Atma Buddhi. There is no idea of sexual love in the conception. Kama is preeminently the divine desire of creating happiness and love. And it is only ages later, as mankind began to materialise by anthropomorphization its grandest ideals into cut and dried dogmas, that Kama became the power that gratifies desire on the animal plane. So we can see from this quote that even compassion is misunderstood, as H.P. Blavatsky states in a footnote in The Voice of the Silence. This compassion must not be regarded in the same light as God, the divine love of the theists. Compassion stands here as an abstract, impersonal law, whose nature, being absolute harmony, is thrown into confusion by discord, suffering, and sin. It is such a feeling that the true poets tried to capture in their words. I feel that they had something deep within that it was impossible to share accurately. But because of the kinship they felt with their fellow humans, they needed to try. Otherwise they may have had to live in loneliness like aliens in a world that made no sense. Far from wanting fame and fortune, many would spurn that, as many have, and prefer to die in the gutter for true art than live in riches for a counterfeit muse. It is almost a possession that they have to give out, and what their heart feels deep within. It is like the Voice of the Silence when it says, if thou wouldst have that stream of hard-earned knowledge, of wisdom, heaven-born, remain sweet-running waters, thou should not leave it to become a stagnant pond. You have to give it out. This is why it's important to share things, not just keep them within, to share them. That's why I always like to share my poetry, my writings and ideas with people. Otherwise they would become a stagnant pond in time. So to prevent the experience from becoming a stagnant pond, it needs to flow through us to remain as a fresh stream. To let feelings and emotions on all levels to remain within us and not to share with others is building the walls that create the great dire heresy of separateness that weans us from the rest. And this is very prevalent. A lot of things in society seem to be pushing us towards this great dire heresy of separateness. And I'm sure most of you can think of things nowadays that are doing that. We come to understand a person a lot more through their poetry than we do by talking to them on a mundane level, because we learn more about their soul life, and therefore more about our own soul life and the soul life of humanity, because all are one. If you talk to people, they just give an image of themselves that they want to try and give to you. It's not the deepest and purest image that they have. So poetry can take us from the mephitic air of materialistic society towards the pure, clear air of the mountainous regions of the spiritual. We go beyond the mists and see the sun at last, free from a life led by artificial light. To read, and more so to write poetry, can be therapeutic, just as can music or painting or dance or any kind of activity that allows us to express those things that lie deep within the heart. If we are touched by the spirit, then the body and the personal self can become an expression of that, so that rather than being led by the personal self and the lower mind, they are used as avenues of spiritual expression. As HPB once again says, H.P. Blavatsky, be what he may, once the student abandons the old and trodden highway of routine and enters upon the solitary path of independent thought, Godward, he is a theosophist, an original thinker, a seeker after the eternal truth, with an inspiration of his own to solve the universal problems. So this is, here she's pointing, as she did many times, she points to the fact that our experiences should be spontaneous and our own particular experiences. As it says in Zen, 1,000 monks, 1,000 ways. We all have our own way. It has to be an inspiration of our own, whoever we are. So let's recap on some of the points raised. In the sense of artists, poets, musicians or painters, this inspiration is in their works. Other people, not artistically inclined, will have other means to express their inspiration, but the poet has a longing in their heart to express the deepest feelings and to share them with others. The greatest poets throughout history have had in mind the benefit of humanity in general and have written poems that will raise humanity. Such poets were often initiated into the mysteries of their civilizations. Indian, Chinese, Greek, Romans, Egyptians, and also through Europe, etc., gave out or concealed their teachings in their poems, which were rich in symbology, as I've previously said regarding the Sufi poets. Personally, what appeals to me about poetry is its brevity, especially as regards the poems of the Chinese and Japanese. It leaves room to think or use the imagination or intuition. Chinese painting owes more to the spaces than to the actual painting, as they often point to the fullness of the seeming void and the voidness of the seeming full. In the same way, Chinese poetry allows the mind to fill in the gaps and leads it towards the infinite, as does the Japanese. It doesn't satiate the lower aspects of the mind with facts and create a ready-made imagery that requires only passivity, like a TV program or a film, but stimulates the spiritual power in us to use our own imagination and intuitions. But it creates a wonderful foundation from which the mind can soar. This is basically true of most poetry, unless it is narrative poetry, which of course serves another purpose. But what is it that really lives in the heart of a poet, that makes their vision so clear when it comes to finding beauty in the world, extracting wonder from things that most others might find ordinary or dull? There needs to be a certain sensitivity to moods and to changes in light, or the way light strikes an object, or the symmetry of something that evokes the beauty inherent in it or in a person. Certain people, due to karmic reasons, have this kind of vision that may be inaccessible to most others. And if they have it, something extremely precious and should be cultivated and not given up for the will-o'-the-wisps of modern society and goals that can't bring any deeper understanding and therefore enrich the soul. Something that is permanent and will add to the enlightenment of the individual and, more importantly, to humanity in general. I think anyone who feels the urge to write a poem should. Many are put off by the idea that poetry should rhyme. This is not true. In fact, many terrible poems have been perpetrated through people trying to force a poem to rhyme. It all depends on the poem and the poet. Some poems suit a rhyming pattern, others don't. The writer has to decide which format to use. People who are ignorant of the motivation for writing poems are caught up in the rhythm and structure. But usually these are people who take a too intellectual view of poetry, and many of them have little poetry in their souls. Otherwise they would realise that poetry is an expression of what is in the heart. Otherwise it is the ability to express something very deep in a few words. The Zen poetess Rengetsu, her name means lotus moon, which I think is very beautiful, said in one of her poems, "If I too could somehow open the lotus blossom within my own heart and colour it pure white, how happy I would be." If I too could somehow open the lotus blossom within my own heart and colour it pure white, how happy I would be. Which says everything about what we should all be aiming at, opening up the spiritual, illumining our minds with the light of spirit. In Theosophical teaching, the higher aspects of our mind are in the heart. So we open up our hearts to true spirituality and colour it pure white, which again represents the spiritual. Another great poem of Rengetsu's says, "On each dewdrop I count one moon after another, all night to daybreak." Seemingly very simple, but in it is a great teaching. The moon in the sky is reflected in every bit of water over the earth, every sea, lake, pond, puddle, glass of water or dewdrop. It therefore appears to be countless moons, but it is just one in reality. So it is that the spirit appears to be your spirit and my spirit, but in fact it is the same spirit in everyone. This is the only basis for true compassion. In the secret doctrine, we are told, "Lift thy head, O Lanu. Dost thou see one or countless lights above thee, burning in the dark midnight sky? I sense one flame, O Gurudeva. I see countless undetached sparks shining in it. Thou sayest well. I now look around and into thyself. That light which burns inside thee, dost thou feel it different in any wise from the light that shines in thy brother men? It is in no way different, though the prisoner is held in bondage by karma, and though its outer garment delude the ignorant into saying, thy soul and my soul." So there is a wealth of teaching for the eager soul in the writings of many of the world's great spiritual poets. I hope that my few words this afternoon will inspire you all to look for yourselves. Om Shanti, 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 peace, peace, peace. Peace on earth and goodwill to all beings. And thank you all for listening, and see you soon.